Hello, everybody. We have a fantastic show for you today. Return guest Henry G. Man, I cannot talk enough about his book, A Very Short History of Life on Earth. This is one of my favorite episodes of the show. So fantastic. And not only that, this is one of my first recordings since coming back from a winter break. Had all sorts of crap that I had to work on, and all sorts of exciting things being announced. One, I have a residency starting in Las Vegas, Sundays, April 23rd, Psychedelic Sundays at Area 15 in Las Vegas. They are partners with Meow Wolf, the artist collective, if you've ever heard of them. Such a perfect venue. It's not a casino or anything. It's just this really immersive, epic, awesome art space. Look it up if you haven't checked it out. I'm going to have some sneaky ticket links on Shane Mauss, MAUSS.com. Maybe even by the time that you're watching this, or very soon. They're not announcing it just yet because it's actually a new room that they've built, and this show is part of a big announcement for the show in this new room. So that's going to be like March 4th or something like that. It's going to be announced. I'm so excited. I'm still in Raleigh at the moment, trying to make Mumfest 2 happen here, and everything fell apart. A whole long story. So it's getting pushed back to sometime next year, finding different locations, stuff like that. But we are instead going to have a Mind Under Matter, and here we are, get together. I'm basically telling fans of mine that want to like all hang out in Vegas that if you want to come to my May 14th show, that whole weekend, come. It's no extra fee or anything, just whatever you find for plane tickets or casinos, hotels, or whatever. Like there's a Palace Station right by Area 15 that I've stayed there for under $100 a night, and it's a decent, good room. It's just off the strip, so it's a really good deal. And so I'll just we'll figure it out on Discord. If you're not on Discord but you're interested in hearing more, hit me up. I can send you a link. There'll be more details coming soon, but my guess is like probably just a whole bunch of us will walk around on the strip on the Saturday, and I'll just have the whole weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We'll probably like go to Area 15. There's this amazing 𝕊𝕬𝕟 weird art installation. It's this whole alien world, essentially. It's so cool. Before my show Monday, I'll be around to hang out with people and just play it by ear. There's a bunch of cool stuff to do outdoors, and this is kind of planning this off the kind of by the seat of my pants a little bit, because I was disappointed there's not going to be a camp out festival this year. There's all sorts of good stuff in the works. I'm starting a science communication nonprofit. That's going to be takes a long time to start a nonprofit, but it's in the works, and it's going to be the umbrella for Here We Are and for the festival and some of my other science communication, like stand-up science, when I start bringing back that and touring with that as well. So many things happening, and last minute, I decided to line up some shows to do a Vegas warm-up show. So I am basically beelining it from Raleigh to LA for some cool opportunities that came up in both Vegas and LA for me. And so in the area already, if you're listening to this, this is next Tuesday, February 28th. I'm in DC. Go to shanemauss.com for these dates. March 2nd, I'm in Charleston, South Carolina. March 3rd, I'm in Greensboro, North Carolina. March 4th, I'm in Raleigh. March 7th, I'm in Asheville. March 8th, Atlanta. And I'm working on, so that's just how far I've gotten with the booking, but I'm filling in new dates all the time. And so basically going from Atlanta, maybe up through Nashville, through Arkansas, Oklahoma City, maybe Denver. And I need to get to Vegas by the third week of March to do some stuff with the space, and then get to LA shortly after to do a bunch of podcasts and promotion and stuff. I might be flying to New York quick after that to do a bunch of podcasts and promotion stuff. So everywhere that I'm going, I'll be lining up a lot of last minute pop-up shows. So make sure, go to shanemauss.com and join my email list, because things are just happening really fast with all of this. I've just had a lot of like cool opportunities happen recently, especially after a really crazy 2 months of winter. Finally, all of the puzzle pieces started coming together, and I'm very excited about what this year is now looking like for me. This show in Vegas, it's a immersive psychedelic comedy show. It's, I toured with my show A Good Trip, did a 111 city tour back in 2016, 2017. I'm now bringing a version of that show and an updated version of that show that's going to be morphing and changing into a completely different show as well. I am bringing that to the best venue for this show. It's going to be 6 Sundays in a row to start, with the intention of continuing the show after that. It's starting April 23rd. If you've seen my Comedy Central Tales from the Trip, which another one just came out yesterday at the time, if you happen to be listening to this at the day that it was released. But again, if you go to the Shane Mauss YouTube page, you can find that as well. That's one all about with both me and 𝕊𝕚𝕤𝕚 talking about an experience that we had at the festival. Really fun story. And so yeah, I have the creator of Comedy Central Tales from the Trip doing some animation for the show in Vegas. I have another VJ that's been doing digital art and a video jockey, so adding video immersive experiences to domes and walls and all sorts of like projection art to make kind of immersive psychedelic experiences for people. So he's helping add some atmosphere to my show and putting cool backgrounds in and adding to some of my stories and some of the ideas. And I'm just so absolutely thrilled to be putting all this together. And I have like just not been in the mood to do stand-up since COVID. I haven't wanted to gather people indoors. I haven't missed stand-up. I kind of felt like I lost my passion for it. And even the psychedelic space and everything, I was kind of, back and forth and whether I cared as much about doing, like that aspect of what I do. I love this show. This show's my favorite thing that I do. I wish more people wanted to hear about what academics had to say. I wish Henry G, who is on my show coming up, was famous, because he should be the type of person that is famous for his ability to articulate life and existence itself in such a clear and creative and poetic and funny way. So I get bitter sometimes that all of our priorities are weird and I don't understand them, and I don't understand why people like the things that they like. And so I just have mixed feelings about existence, and not existence, but also just the sensibilities of these social primates we call humans. And then I had this opportunity to do this show where I'm getting to collaborate with artists and create something that's different than I think has ever been done before, and I'm excited again. I am thrilled. I'm excited to do these warm-up shows. I'm excited to be back on stage again. And so, yeah, I hope you get a chance to see me, to see the show. Again, it's the weekend of the May 14th is the Sunday that the show's on that weekend, and I think, I'll be around Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday for just any fans of this show or Mind Under Matter who want to come and figure out how many people we're going to have. And then we'll figure out some cool group activities and stuff like that. And I'm happy to organize it and let other people organize it in the community. And for, like I said, free of charge. I'm not getting anything out of it other than to meet all you wonderful people in the community and get to show off my new show to the people that I value the most, which is the people that are into like the Here We Are podcast and Mind Under Matter podcast. You guys are obviously my target demographics. So I love getting a chance to hang out with you guys. I can't wait to do it more in the future. So check out ShaneMauss.com. Shows are coming in fast. I'm going to be stringing together a lot of last minute things. And once I get the show up and sorted out, because it's just each Sunday, we've got to see how it goes, because we might add like a Thursday show each week as well, or maybe not enough people will show up and it will just be the 6-week run, and then I'll just tour with it around the country. Who knows? But I'll know by May about adding more dates in other regions as well. But if you really want to see me, check the website, see if you can catch one of my shows in March, or plan on coming that May 14th weekend. And this has been such a long introduction. So a whole lot of information there. And enjoy today's episode. It's probably one of my favorite Here We Are episodes that I have had.
Are we?
Yes.
Where are we?
Here.
Why are we here? Not entirely clear. We are misfits thrust into existence by random chance, with no hints at all as to how we're supposed to make sense of it all. It's immensely bizarre. Here we are.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Here We Are podcast. Today is one of my favorite guests ever from the show, returning to talk about one of my favorite books that I have ever read. Henry G is joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Shane. How are you?
I'm wonderful.
Yes, you are wonderful, and I love the beard. It just gets more and more luxuriant every time I see it. I have serious beard envy.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what to do with it, but for now we just keep it.
It should have its own podcast soon.
Yeah, I know. I should get a sponsor or something. Yeah, I don't put anything in it, just some conditioner in case. I know it's been on all the listeners' mind. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to address that. It's actually a little. I haven't showered yet today or anything, so it's a
Shane's
little dry
beard
and frizzy.
is brought to you by XXX product.
So your book, A Very Short History of Life on Earth, 4.6 billion years in 12 pithy chapters. I had you on the show to talk about it before I had read the book. And then I just had such a wonderful time chatting with you, whatever, a year ago or something like that. I don't even remember.
How time flies.
I know. And then back in November, I had a project where I wanted to start writing some stuff out about the history of life on Earth. And I was like, you know what? I should read Henry's book. And I happened to be at a very stressful time in my life. It actually only got worse, but during that time, it's fine now. But at the time, reading your book was something that just brought me so much peace and joy.
I'm very glad that it brought you some philosophic repose.
Oh my gosh, just to pull back from everything and just to really dig into, and in such an accessible, well-written, poetic, easy to understand way that anyone, if it's their first science book ever, could clearly understand, and just so beautifully written, and just thinking about just the entire universe and just everything that led us to be here. Just what a brilliant and beautiful reminder of just how strange this existence is. That not only that we exist in it, and as we'll talk about, there's kind of one of the cool points that you make in your book is that life isn't very strange at all to have happened. It happened again and again and again. It's harder to stop life than to start it, almost. But that we get to exist and then get to experience to get to be a species that understands the things like the Big Bang, and that we rotate around the sun, and that we are a product of billions of years of evolutionary processes, is just really incredible, and just brings me such a sense of peace and joy to think about. So thank you so much for your book.
You're very welcome, sir. I'm glad to be of service.
I usually read like 3-4 chapters of a book, and then I'm like, okay, I got it enough for an interview or something.
Oh,
and then I need to move on to the next.
I have to complete. I'm obsessive. I have to. There are very few books that I don't finish. I even if it's a book I don't like, I doggedly go to the end, because I feel I have to do it so I can write it on my blog and say what I read, such and such. But I'm a bit of a masochist in that way.
So I would first like to understand, was the experience of writing the book anything like that for you, or was it brimming with stress and confusion and figuring out how to put it all together? I mean, you were able to take such dense and complicated things and really sum it up in such a beautiful, concise, understandable way.
I'm ashamed to say that it was really easy. I mean, at this point, you have an author and they say, no, I was in my garret in Paris for a year, living on absinthe and charity, and resting each painful word in blood from my fevered brain. Sadly, it was not the case. It just wrote itself. It was the easiest book I've ever written. It just fell into its own groove. There was a kind of previous version that had more anecdotes and more jokes in it. But it was whittled down to just the narrative, and I put the jokes in the footnotes. And once I'd got that once upon a time moment, because it starts like every good story, it starts once upon a time.
Just get the book and read the first. Can people read just the first few pages? No, not you. You can if you want. But I'm telling listeners to, like, if they can just go on and read the first 2 pages of the book, they're going to be sold. But yeah, this would be a treat. Let's have you read it.
Okay,
just that first section.
I'll just read the first paragraph. Once upon a time, a giant star was dying. It had been burning for millions of years. Now the fusion furnace at its core had no more fuel to burn. The star created the energy it needed to shine by fusing hydrogen atoms to make helium. The energy produced by the fusion did more than make the star shine. It was vital to counteract the inward pull of the star's own gravity. When the supply of available hydrogen began to run low, the star began to fuse helium into atoms of heavier elements such as carbon and oxygen. By then, though, the star was running out of things to burn. The day when the fuel ran out completely Gravity won the battle. The star imploded. After the millions of years of burning, the collapse took a split second. It prompted a rebound so explosive that it lit up the universe, a supernova. Any life that might have existed in the star's own planetary system would have been obliterated, but in the cataclysm of its death were born the seeds of something new. Even heavier chemical elements forged in the final moments of the star's life, silicon, nickel, sulfur, and iron, were spread far and wide by the explosion. Millions of years later, the gravitational shockwave of the supernova explosion passed through a cloud of gas, dust, and ice. The stretch and squeeze of the gravitational wave made the cloud fall in on itself. As it contracted, it started to rotate. The pull of gravity squeezed the gas at the cloud's center so much that atoms began to fuse together. Hydrogen atoms were pressed together, forming helium, creating light and heat. The circle of stellar life was complete. From the death of an ancient star emerged another, fresh and new, our sun.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, I get teary-eyed. That's just I've revisited that section many times and read it to friends. It's beautiful. So first of all, how something that I struggle with myself is I love thinking about just the scope and the scale of things, and oh my gosh, an appreciation of how we are here, and then you catch me on the bad on the wrong day, and then just the other side of that coin is just how small and insignificant we all are. Do you go back and forth a little bit when you're kind of?
Yeah, I do. It's something that I think is important in communicating science, is but to communicate both sides. First, the wonder of it all, and second, the terror of our insignificance in the great scheme of things. And somebody asked me, if I actually have to shut myself in a small box with my hands over my eyes, sometimes. But no, I have achieved a philosophic repose, I think. I feel a lot calmer knowing how insignificant we are on the great scheme of things, that nothing really much matters.
Takes the pressure off.
It just does that, yeah.
That's beautiful. So I would love to start with, well, we've already started, but I mentioned this in the intro. You did a wonderful job of articulating that life did not start in some pleasant Goldilocks zone of Garden of Eden, just perfectly primed for life to flourish. And it started in a much, much more hellish environment. And from that probably started again and again and again and again until life as we know it took off.
Yeah, life has a motto. It's called "Whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger." And Darwin speculated in a letter to a friend that life probably started in some warm little pond. Well, yes, but if the warm little pond was in the deep, dark, deep sea full of sulfur and iron minerals at incredible temperatures and superheated pressures that would squash you flat, and if you were down there now, life started in some of what we would call the most inhospitable places that you could imagine, near a crack in the Earth's crust where minerals were gushing out, where water under incredible pressure was superheated, and yet little eddies of these minerals would get trapped in little holes in volcanic rocks. And in the slightly calmer environment of these little superheated, super pressurized warm little ponds, that's when life would have started. But I have to say that we don't really actually know when life started, or well, we've got some good idea when, but we don't really know how. So I have to put various provisos in the notes in the book to say this is the closest I get to what we scientists call making stuff up. So there are the thing about life, though, that we do know is it started almost indecently quickly after the Earth formed. I mean, the Earth formed and the whole solar system formed 4.6 billion years ago, and the Earth didn't instantly form into our quiet blue planet that we now know. It was a whole ball of molten lava for a long time, and with the atmosphere full of superheated steam and methane and carbon dioxide and other things. And yet, a mere 500 million years later, by 4.1 million years ago, life had begun. And by that time, the Earth had cooled just enough for all the water vapor in the atmosphere to condense and fall as rain, and it fell as rain for millions and millions of years, which would be remarkable even in Seattle. And in the and there were a few comets whizzing in still at the time, adding various more water and various exotic chemicals from outer space that may have helped nudge life along a bit. But by that time, life had definitely begun in the deep sea. And once begun, it was very, very hard to get rid of.
Yeah. So one thing that I loved about your book, but I know and kind of telling some of the other people about aspects of it is the book does, as you kind of mentioned there, that this exactly what happened at the origin, the very, very, very first bits of life is pretty speculative, probably the most speculative part of your book. But your book really does,
the very end where I talk about what's going to happen in the next billion years.
That's true.
That's also fairly speculative. But that's in the free extra billion years I give you at the end.
So your book kind of just assumes. I really liked it because it was like, hey, this is just what we know. Let's just assume we know this stuff. But it doesn't. Your book doesn't really get into how we know this stuff. Like a really good complementary book is Your Inner Fish by Neil Shubin, who he really kind of gets into how we know these sort of things and the sort of studies that are being done that lead to these speculations. And then you just kind of tell the story, because sometimes I love just hearing the story, because I talk with scientists all the time and I already have a sense of how some of this information is gathered. But you tell this to people and people go, well, how the heck could they know something like that? And have there been models and things made of kind of testing how life could arise from nothingness that you found yourself drawn to?
I think my favorite one, I mean, there are lots and lots of ideas about how life began. One of the most famous one was the 𝕊𝕙𝕒𝕟𝕚 experiment, where some scientists put what was then supposed to be in the early atmosphere in a jar and sparked electrical currents through it, and then discovered all sorts of complicated chemicals in the brown glop at the bottom afterwards. But my favorite one is the problem with getting the complex molecules. Can I say molecules? The complex molecules you need for life is that as soon as they form, they're going to be ripped apart again. So my favorite idea is that the organic chemicals would have got together on the surfaces, the very porous surfaces of volcanic rocks, in tiny, tiny microscopic little holes and channels where they couldn't escape or get away. And also the surfaces of the volcanic rocks would have been catalytic. The little molecules would have sat on the surfaces and bound together before they could be blown apart. And that's the kind of idea that's been going on. It could be volcanic rock, it could be clay minerals, it could be all sorts of things like that. So that's the idea that I tend to favor. Also, there's quite a lot of evidence now that the earliest life would have happened at very high temperatures. That it started in the sort of superheated milieu in the deep, near hydrothermal vents in the deep sea. That would have been a good place for life to start.
And this would have had to have happened just an uncountable number of times because it wasn't like the very first time life started that led to our evolutionary tree. That just seems
that's very true.
Improbable.
Sorry. You were saying I interrupted you very rudely.
Oh, not at all. I just wanted to see. Do you think that this still happens regularly today, or is there just so much life now that there's not really a space to make it from scratch?
Yeah, so I think the latter. I think if any promising little organic molecules got together, they would be promptly consumed by existing life. But the thing about life is that it arrived so early, and so that suggests that in suitable planets elsewhere in the universe, on rocky Earth-like planets, life would be a given. Life would just happen. It would just be a normal kind of event to happen on a rocky planet with an ocean. And so I think the probability of life elsewhere in the universe is huge. It needn't be intelligent life, of course, apart from you and me, of course, and present company accepted. But but I think life is very, very common in the universe. I think it has to be.
Yeah, I think that seems obvious to me as well.
I think we'll discover it soon. Yeah. I mean, it won't be that somebody's put a gummy bear in the end of somebody's telescope or anything, but we're almost at the point with some of the space telescopes that there are now that we can find the signatures of atmospheres of exoplanets, of planets around other stars, and from that you could tell if the atmosphere is what's called out of equilibrium. In other words, something or other is contributing to the atmosphere, oxygen or methane or something. And soon we'll get an idea of out of equilibrium processes, which is, when you count off all the other possibilities that it might be, life is definitely in the frame. To cause that. So I think that will be fairly soon. I mean, I don't know. I have no privileged information about this, but I wouldn't be at all. I mean, I'd be so thrilled if it happened, but I wouldn't be surprised, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, of course. I mean, even if it happens in the next 50, 100 years, that's still just a little blip in time. Have you seen? I think I've referenced this on the show a couple times in the past. Have you seen the docuseries Alien Worlds on Netflix?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's this sort of thing. So it's having all of these different astronomers and biologists and things like that talking about what life is like here, what are the various aspects that made it, and then looking to the stars to be like, hey, well, in this area, it looks like maybe there could be, and then this is what we speculate life could be like on a planet where it has 10 times the gravity that we have, and that sort of thing. It's really cool.
So what's it called again?
Alien Worlds.
I'll have to pinch my son's Netflix password. Oh, I didn't say that.
Don't you dare say that. We're gonna edit that out. We are everyone recording this and everyone listening to the show. We all have our own Netflix subscriptions. We're all doing it on the up and up. But
my son actually says there is no intelligent life on Earth because he's only waiting for the lizard people to come back and claim him for their own. And you can tell he's my boy.
The rebel of the family, then.
Yeah, I don't know. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, really.
I love this. Well, you and I have talked off the air because I've contacted you regarding kind of specifically some projects that I'm
some nice juicy projects you're involved with.
Yeah, and so I just love this. The other thing, I've spent so much time on this show for the last over 8 years talking about evolution, reading about evolution, talking with people that research evolution, evolutionary biology, psychology, and this talks about evolution. And I read your book and I'm like, how did I not know so much of this stuff? It made me feel like a fool. But I really loved going. I just hadn't, you know, I have a rather human centric view on evolution, and I have focused a lot more on the last, you know, couple 100,000 years, like I'm sure a lot of people tend to. But going back to after we know kind of life was formed, and then we know some of these earlier processes, I really, you'll know eventually where I'm going, but I love this idea of energy and chemicals kind of being able to combine and settle in just bubbles and within the membrane that then, under the right circumstances, just happens to stumble on a way to replicate, and then through that replication, everything else starts. But and then from that, now these bubbles are these little things with membranes are somehow taking energy in, but then an important part of it is waste out and filtering out energy. And you have something that when I started reading it captured my imagination so much, and then it just kept on. I just kept on seeing it all through the book, which is just how very important the invention of the anus was in our evolutionary history. Could you go into that a little bit?
Oh yes, the anus, the a hole. Yes, someone said you have the pie hole at one end and the a hole at the other. Well, early animals. Early creatures were very, very small, and they just took in food throughout their entire surface. And they excreted waste throughout their entire surface. But then you can do that when you're the size of a period at the end of a sentence. But other creatures, early worms, early jellyfish, they had a mouth, and they were kind of cup-shaped, if you see what I mean. They had an outside and an inside, but they only had one entrance and exit to get into the inside and the outside. And jellyfish and coral polyps and many creatures are still like this today. So the food goes in the one hole, and all the waste comes out of the of that. It's
got to taste so much better on the way in.
Well, I don't know, unless if it's a vindaloo curry where you know you get it, you get to eat it twice. So but the waste would be just diffuse. It would be just like ammonia, and it would just dissolve in the water, and it would be just waste products. Now, in the early ocean, the problem with diffusing the waste like that is all the decay bacteria would chomp it immediately, and there would be and the decay bacteria used all the oxygen in the water. So the seawater was stagnant, and there wasn't enough oxygen for animals to evolve or grow. But then some enterprising worms evolved an anus at the other end. So there was a gut that was through like a conveyor belt. So there was, the mouth at one end and the anus at the other. And then they had, it wasn't just the anus, it was the whole business of concentrating feces, what we scientists call poop, into pellets that would drop to the bottom of the sea. It was a race to the bottom. See what I did there? And, so all the decay bacteria would go like this, whoosh, to the bottom of the sea. And so they wouldn't be consuming the oxygen all the way up through the water. They would be just consuming the oxygen near the sea bottom. And that would make it easier for oxygen to accumulate in the water. So the water wasn't stinky and stagnant anymore. It was fresh and blue and full of oxygen. And that's when animals could evolve. And it was all to do with the evolution of the anus. So there you are.
It's amazing. And it's another thing that struck me as just such a, I always love thinking about how our idea of good and bad is so subjective and so context dependent. And I'll often reference something like a dung beetle, for instance, where the very thing that is the most revolting for us. Our waste product we run from, we flush, we don't want to look at it, we want to get away from the stuff, we don't want to smell it, we don't want to think about it, is that very thing is just a thing of beauty to a dung beetle. It's its home, it's where it picks up
or
its
my
mates.
golden retriever puppy.
Exactly. And so it's a
right little coprophage she is. Yeah.
and it's all of this it's this very whether it's because a puppy is being curious, or that there's minerals in it that aren't in common dog food or so, but there's what is good is so dependent on what it's for. And when you talk about oxygen, for example, we think about oxygen and we think, oxygen, what a wonderful thing. We're breathing in this oxygen stuff that we've heard about since we were a little kid. And now we can go to an oxygen bar and get even more of this stuff. And but oxygen was not a life's friend in the very beginning.
Oxygen is one of the most lethal and deadly substances in the universe. Colorless, odorless, it burns everything it touches. And life evolved in the complete absence of oxygen. There was lots of other things as well. Oxygen was produced as a waste product of a process called photosynthesis, which I find it hard to say because I've got rather loose teeth. But it's the process whereby algae and plants split the elements of water using sunshine, and they use the hydrogen atoms to go plink, 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 plink down a chemical cascade, generate electrons, and that drives chemical work and creates sugars. So the problem is when you split hydrogen and oxygen, water into hydrogen and oxygen, the oxygen is a waste product and it just goes into the atmosphere. And of course, what happened was it was lethally poisonous to virtually every organism on the earth at that very early time. So the very earliest mass extinction was all these creatures going and expiring because of the oxygen. In fact, there's some creatures today which are called anaerobes, to which oxygen is poisonous. One of the most famous is Clostridium botulinum, the bacterium that causes botulism, which it festers in canned food that's not been properly canned. But of course, botulinum toxin is Botox, is what people use to paralyze the nerves in their face. So they look young and beautiful but can't say anything.
But they can't get depressed anymore because they are incapable of frowning. So that's that's another thing that is kind of a similar point is the sun. We think about it's wintertime right now. Like, oh my gosh, I've missed this sunlight stuff. I can't wait for there to be more sunlight in the day. I just saw some post on Instagram today. Over this month, this region's going to get 40 more minutes of sunlight a day. Oh, thank goodness. I can finally go off my meds and stuff again. And we worship the sun, but the sun was not at all the friend to early life as well. Exactly.
When early life came from the deep dark, oxygen-free depth of the ocean, and dark, well away from sunlight. But when life got to the surface, it saw the sun, and the ultraviolet radiation would have fried it. So as well as oxygen asphyxiating, it would have been fried by, I suppose that early life was a bit sort of vampiric. It would have to have the curtains drawn all the time and only come out at night. But the sunshine was poisonous. Sunshine is poisonous. It's got harmful UV rays. So what the early bacteria did was evolve pigments to absorb the sunshine. In other words, they evolved sunscreen, and they trapped the sun's energy, and then they put the energy to work by making food for itself. So it's a phrase I use in the book. Harm had become harvest.
Okay, so there's this idea of harm becoming harvest. This is just the ways in which things just get used and co-opted, and all these different opportunities and niches that show up, and just one thing's waste is another thing's meal, and just over and over again. This is happening all through our evolutionary history. One of the things that, going back to the evolution of the anus, this freed up. There were these kind of slits for diffusing waste in some early life, that then once there was an anus, you no longer needed these slits for diffusion in some future species, and those eventually got co-opted into gills for breathing.
Gills are still used for excreting salt. Strangely enough, but that complicates matters, I suppose. But the gills were, originally used for excretion, and not breathing.
That's incredible. And then the idea too that that then eventually, if you kind of follow gills into eventually not being necessary once there's life on land, and then those become getting moved backwards, back in the head, and eventually becoming the ear, right?
Yeah, it's these are things that I just thought I'd tell it as a story. I mean, 𝕊𝕙𝕒𝕚 tells it better than me in You're in a Fish. I mean, the whole gill structure becomes the bones that support the tongue and the throat, and in the middle ear, and loads and loads. But the thing about evolution is it very rarely makes anything from new. It's very good at upcycling and recycling what it's already got, and getting it to do new things.
One of my favorite subjects, I don't think you brought this up in the book, but maybe this would be the time to I wonder if we're jumping ahead too much, but this might be an interesting time to talk about bipedalism. I guess I was thinking that I really like thinking about these evolutionary holdovers, these ways in which, like you said, things just get co-opted and using what's already there, and then some of these things stick around and become vestigial, or some of these things are just different patterns, behaviors within a species, just outlast their utility. And the reason why something was made in the first place eventually gets lost and is no longer serves that purpose, and now is just, it doesn't need to be there anymore. Like a koala bear no longer needs to have as big of a brain because it can just sit and right where it is and munch on leaves without having to investigate much of its environment and that sort of thing. Do you have do you find yourself thinking about that at all, in terms of just within us, just any of these kind of vestigial things that we have, where you can just look at anything and go, no designer would have constructed something like this from scratch.
Exactly. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about bipedalism in connection with my next book that I'm writing at the moment. And bipedalism is such the most unlikely thing. We're the only mammals that are regularly bipedal. I mean, kangaroos are bipedal, but they hop and they do it differently, and they use a long tail as a kind of counterbalance. And dinosaurs and birds are bipedal, but they do it differently as well, because their backbone remains horizontal. But what we've done is this most lunatic, ridiculous thing, which is taking the backbone, which is a perfectly good structure that evolved 500 million years ago, and it evolved to be horizontal in water, a structure under tension. So what have we done? We've turned it through a quarter turn, so it's vertical and it's in compression. So cue, backache, piles, herniated discs, all sorts of problems that of all sorts of health problems have come from the fact that we are bipedal and we walk on our hind legs. It's just nonsense. I mean, ridiculous. Nobody would have designed this to happen. And the big question is why we are bipeds. Now, there are lots of, after the fact teleological explanations. We are bipeds so we could look over the tall grass. We are bipeds so that we only present a small cross section to the hot sun. We're bipeds so we can hold tools and throw stones at each other, and we're bipeds so that we can pick our noses and walk at the same time. But all these are after the fact explanations. Why humans are bipeds is a big mystery. Now, I think the solution possibly is to look back maybe 10 million years or more to when the world was a planet of apes. There were all sorts of apes, all of which were now extinct. And some of them invented this. Some of them became quite big. And the ancestors of apes were monkey-like animals that would run along branches and maybe swing below branches. But some of these, having lost their tails and became quite big, would clamber through the branches in a kind of vertical pose. So my feeling is that bipedalism is just like clambering through branches, only without the branches. And that's how we ended up being bipeds for all, and now we're bipeds. There ain't no going back to the happy quadrupedal locomotion that most animals seem to be perfectly happy with.
It is just so funny how I'm sure every single species just thinks that they are just the best designed. However they do things is the best way to go about doing it, and everything else. And so it is so hard to escape that human centrism, because even things like things like bipedal, like, well, I guess we're the only ones that do it because we're the best. We're the only ones that were lucky enough to figure it out.
We are quite good at doing it. Yeah. But then if you imagine an animal that has, an animal that has 4 legs can lose a leg and still run along. I mean, the world is full of happy 3-legged dogs. But if we break a leg, we're incapacitated. And I wrote this in a footnote in the book. I said that animals that apes and hominins that decided to become bipedal had to become bipedal very, very quickly. And if you like, I can read that bit out because
sure.
So you might have to edit a pause here. So
no, it's all good.
Because it might take me a while to get to it.
But there's this kind of, what we don't think about is all of those awkward steps in between to get to the efficient bipedal marathon runners that we are today.
Well, quite. I mean, the first creatures that were bipedal were not well. They could walk. Anyway, here it is. If you're a biped, if you've just evolved bipedalism, you have to get very good at it very quickly, because natural selection would exact a terrible toll if you break your leg. And this is a note I wrote in the book, and it says something so I had a lot of fun stuff writing the notes. Oh boy, this is where I put all the fun stuff. Something I discovered for myself when I broke an ankle in a trivial accident at home in August 2018. This mishap left me entirely helpless, a state ameliorated by the instantly accessible ministrations of the almost incomprehensibly complex and vast apparatus that is the British National Health Service, including an ambulance, a fully equipped teaching hospital, paramedics, nurses, anaesthetists, surgeons, not to mention an army of support staff, including the nice man who brought us cups of tea when I was at the hospital. And when I left hospital, physiotherapists, the loan of a wheelchair from the Red Cross, and mostly the care of the long-suffering Mrs. G, who decided, at least partly on the strength of it, to enroll for a degree in nursing, specialising in patients with learning disabilities. Go figure. The National Health Service is the largest employer not just in Britain but in the whole of Europe, and consumes a sizable wedge of Britain's public expenditure. Without such backup, an early hominin that broke its ankle on the African savannah would probably have been killed and eaten. So they had to get very good at it very quickly. And walking, actually, the way we walk is actually quite an efficient energy-saving way of walking, which is why you have to walk an awfully long way to lose any weight. I mean, it will get you nice and fit and healthy, but you won't lose any weight because humans are optimized. Just our steady walk, we recapture a lot of the energy in each step by storing it in the tendons in our legs. It's really clever. So we're very, very good at walking and can walk a long, long way without using too much energy. It's really quite good, but it didn't start that way, you see. It was just branch clambering. But by 3.5 million years ago, our ancestors were as good at walking as we are now. So it happened quite soon, and it had to, because anything that was only half good at walking would have got killed and eaten, and the others would have had to learn to run away. Run away! Run away!
So in that same spirit of things that might seem fantastic and obvious to us now that our ancestors went through all of those selection pressures and fine-tuned everything that we kind of got born into and take for granted. You could make the same argument about being on land in the first place. Land seems like a great place to be if you're a land dweller like a human, but it was not the most obvious step in
no, quite. If you've evolved in water, where you can breathe oxygen in the water through your gills, and you don't have to support your weight, and you're protected from the ultraviolet of the sun by being under the water, which absorbs most of that harmful radiation. So you know, you're above water and you're crushed by your own weight. You're roasted by the sun and asphyxiated by the lack of water on your gills that you need to breathe. So tetrapods, the first land four-legged animals, they didn't boldly go onto land infused with a spirit of manifest destiny. If they found themselves on land, their task was to get back underwater as quickly as possible, before they got crushed, fried, and asphyxiated. So getting onto land, the bugs did it first, because they had bugs, like insects, have exoskeletons, so they can support themselves on land, and they're not very big as well, which also helps. Insects invented and spiders invented, lung-like organs quite early on. And so they managed to do it before the tetrapods did it. The tetrapods, which were basically fish specialized for water of negative depth. So they'd be the fish that we evolved from were predators. They were ambush predators, quite big fish living in shallow water, that would ambush anything passing by. And of course, sometimes the shallow water would become even shallower water, which would become no water at all. And that's the milieu in which our early ancestors evolved.
One huge section that made me just feel like an absolute fool for my lack of knowledge or previous research or insight.
Fie. You do yourself down.
The Jurassic period.
I love the Jurassic period.
Everyone knows about dinosaurs. Everyone's seen Jurassic Park. But yeah, they don't have the Jurassic Park movie.
Yeah, I felt I ought to start the one-man campaign to make the Triassic period more sexy. But in the Triassic period, which happened between, say, 250 and 200 million years ago, the dinosaurs evolved towards the end of the Triassic period. Now, the Triassic period started inauspiciously after the end of the Permian period, which saw the biggest mass extinction of the last 500 million years, when 95% of all organisms were wiped out by a series of unfortunate events involving supervolcanoes that went on for millions of years. So the Triassic period started off without much to show for it, but then life as ever gave a rousing Bronx cheer to the Earth and evolved the most amazing panoply of completely crazy reptilian forms, loads and loads and loads of aquatic forms. The turtles evolved in that period, but they were much more varied than they are now. There were turtles, mock turtles, half turtles, teenage mutant ninja turtles, and all sorts of turtles. Frogs evolved, true frogs and modern amphibians. Also mammals evolved in the Triassic period. Pterosaurs, the pterodactyls, they evolved in the Triassic period. And lots of other completely peculiar reptiles that lived and died in the Triassic. And at the end, the dinosaurs appeared, so they tend to eclipse all the other things that have happened. But the Triassic was the most wonderful period, full of completely wonderful animals, and I would love, if I had a time machine, to visit the Triassic period, various points in the Triassic period in different places. I wanted to say something about the Triassic. I felt I was on a mission.
Well, let's explore it a little more. How did it start? What defined that period? The beginning of that period?
Well, it came out of the end Permian mass extinction, so that provided a clean slate for most of life. But life did get through the Triassic period and evolved into a lot of new amazing forms. So perhaps occasionally, the broom cupboard of life have to get the vacuum cleaner and hoover up a few life forms and get them out of the way for more things to evolve.
This was a big part of your book. Not to cut off, but I also want to talk about this is just how inventive life gets during these mass extinction events.
You see, the Earth tries to kill off life. Life is an irritating infestation on its skin, and it tries to apply various emollients in the form of huge fields of molten lava to try and wipe it all out and try and gas it to death. But, oh no, life will have none of it. The Triassic was the beginning of the modern world, and it's a shame really that we only think of it in terms of the evolution of dinosaurs when it had so much more going for it.
What about the beginning of it? Can we talk about that a little bit?
Well, there was my favorite animal from the Triassic is a creature called 𝕊𝕐𝕗, which is distantly related to mammals. And that was kind of like the weeds on a bomb site. Most animals that you would have met at the very early Triassic would have been a 𝕊𝕐𝕗. And as I didn't have any pictures in the book, I had to use pen portraits and keep it quite concise because it's a very short history of life on Earth. So I described 𝕊𝕐𝕗 as having the body of a pig, the attitude to food of a golden retriever, and the head of an electric can opener. And it was its cheerful, go anywhere, eat anything attitude that got it to survive the rigorous environment of the earliest Triassic. So 𝕊𝕐𝕗 diversified into a load of forms. It survived the end Permian probably because it was a burrower. It used to live in burrows, and living in burrows is always a good thing to do if you want to hide from a mass extinction, so it doesn't know you're there. Early mammals were very good at that. So the Triassic, that was the very start of the Triassic, and for about 5 million years, you just bump into a 𝕊𝕐𝕗 until other things had a chance to catch up. But it was only towards the end that the dinosaurs and mammals evolved. But there were lots of other things in the sea. You know, ichthyosaurs, the biggest marine reptiles that ever lived, was like 21-meter long ichthyosaurs, and they lived in the Triassic. And there were all kinds of other strange creatures.
There's this idea too that I've kind of referenced before, but I just keep going back to is this this intuitive judgment that we put on things, on such things like, say, the direction of evolution, and this assumption that it's always moving toward perfection, and we have found ourselves at this pinnacle. But there's all these examples of things coming up on land and then deciding, you know what, liked the ocean better, and I'm going to evolve back into the ocean.
Oh, that happened a lot in the Triassic period. A lot of reptiles found that they preferred being underwater better. There were these things called placodonts, which looked a bit like turtles but weren't, and they had these big teeth for crushing clams and shellfish. And then there were the ichthyosaurs, and there were lots of other marine reptiles, mixosaurs and mesosaurs and thalatosaurs and pachypleurosaurs and lots of other saurs, of which I shan't even describe, that were kind of long, snaky marine reptiles, some of which evolved into the plesiosaurs, which somebody described as a snake threaded through a turtle. These, things with paddles and long necks and long tails that evolved in the Jurassic. And there were flying animals started. The first pterodactyls, pterosaurs, but there were really weird creatures. There's this crazy little creature called Charovipteryx. Now, most creatures, when they fly, use their front legs to flap. This one had a membrane stretched between its tail and its back legs. Its front legs were free, and it was a kind of delta-winged glider with, it was the most peculiar creature evolved. And then there were the drepanosaurs, which were a bit like sloths, but with bird beaks. They had these long, pointy beaks, and they had claws on their legs that they used to hang from trees. And actually, there are all kinds of reconstructions of drepanosaurs, and no one knows anything. No one knows how true any of them are, because they are just so weird and strange, and nobody knows what they're like.
This happened even far more recently in evolutionary history of things like wolf-like things and cattle, and kind of evolving, going back into the ocean, becoming or these intermediary things.
You're talking about whales.
Talk about whales.
They're amazing. The whole business of whales. They went back to the sea. They started with these little wolf-like running animals, Ichthyolestes and Pachycetus, that looked like dogs, only they had very, very long, toothy jaws. And they were completely terrestrial, except some of them showed some tendency towards wallowing or wading in water. And then, you pick up the story a few million years later, and there's Ambulocetus, which looks like a giant otter. And then you have other animals that look like whales, but with little legs. And then within 8 million years, whales are fully aquatic, with flippers and living their entire lives at sea, and evolving into giant forms. It took just 8 million years. I mean, for that complete transformation to happen, it was really remarkable. They were really dying to get to the beach. They were dying to throw off their clothes and throw themselves into the water.
I mean, this even you mentioned sloths. Sloths did this as well. Turned into aquatic sloths over time when it went into the water, and then decided to come back out too. So there's all sorts of like going back and forth, and species not being able to make up their mind.
The amazing story of Thalassocnus, the Peruvian swimming sloth.
Yeah.
And that was in the Miocene period, just about 10, 15 million years ago. The Peruvian swimming sloth. It also had shared its shared its environment with the walrus-like whale, which was like a little toothed whale, but it had walrus-like tusks that it used to plough up the seabed for mollusks. I mean, Alice in Wonderland or what? I mean, swimming sloths, walrus-like whales, what would they think of next? I mean, you get these things that turn up.
It's
just amazing.
Reality is so much stranger than most any sci-fi that you see. So there's things coming out of the ocean and going back in, changing its mind. There's things that took flight. That's such a crazy, like, what once you figure out flight, you think there's no going back. You don't ground yourself after that. But there are species that gave it up, decided that it didn't care for it.
Well, it's amazing. Birds have really evolved their entire body form for flight, and it's not hard to see why, because flight is so expensive and difficult to do, and this is why birds have used any opportunity to give up flight whenever they possibly can. I mean, ostriches, penguins, a lot of other flightless birds that were extinct and lived in the past. Some of the dinosaurs that were feathered, excuse me, the smaller flying ones were the earliest ones of their own lineages. The later ones were larger and non-flying, which suggests that dinosaurs evolved flight several times and then thought better of it and came back to Earth several times.
Amazing.
And Archaeopteryx, the iconic first bird, was actually just another flying feathered dinosaur. It's just we tend to think about it as the iconic first bird because we've known it much longer than all the other ones.
So same with this kind of bigger is better stuff too, where there's this intuitive assumption of like, oh, life started as this teeny tiny microscopic thing, and then look what came of it. It just got bigger and bigger, and look at us now. Look how much larger we are than so much of life. Well, clearly, this is the best way to be.
Steve Gould punctured that particular item in his book Bully for Brontosaurus years ago, which is if you start small, you can't get smaller. The only thing you can do is get bigger. So the fact that we've got bigger is really no big surprise.
Right. I love. Speaking of birds, this is just another one of these just absolutely mind blowing of how. Of the processes that eventually led to the opportunity for flight is things you would just never, ever intuitively think, like how critters started having hollow bones. For instance, if you could talk about that, just because that's going back to that's the Jurassic period or Jurassic period, right?
Yeah, and well, the thing about hollow bones, I can reference some work done by a friend of mine, Mary Schweitzer, who's worked on ancient molecules and try and work out how animals lived, and she has found that, and other people too, that you can tell a female dinosaur from its bones because these are the ones that have hollowed out the insides of its bones to make calcium for their eggshells. So all the things that you need for flight, like hollow bones, like a rigid airframe, like feathers, like a bipedal stance, like freeing up the forearms, all evolved a very, very long time for them before birds evolved. Feathers are a very good example. There are dinosaurs with feathers that were as aerodynamic as a cinder block, and it was only the small ones that could use these feathers as aerofoils. But what were feathers for? Who knows? All kinds of things, picking their noses. Sexual display, insulation, all sorts of things. But flight was just a kind of interesting byproduct of things that were things that were running up trees or things that were falling out of branches and finding that their fall was somewhat cushioned by this feathery coat.
and the role of thermal regulation, giving rise to that as well, is something that just struck me as just so fascinating.
Yeah, that's all to do with the way that birds have lungs. You see, when we breathe in and we breathe out again, we do it, our air goes into the lungs and then comes out in the same way. But birds and dinosaurs have a completely different way of doing it. The air goes into the lungs, but then gets diverted into a whole load of air sacs that permeate through the body, surrounding the internal organs and even going into the bones. And this is when you pick up a chicken. If a chicken were a mammal, you'd think it was going to be as heavy as a bowling ball, but it's not, because it's mostly full of air. And dinosaurs were like that too. And that's important. That explains how dinosaurs got to be so huge, because one of the problems with being big is losing all that heat that you produce, because if you work it out, your surface area gets proportionately smaller to your volume as you grow. So big animals have a lot more insides compared with their outsides. So if a dinosaur were a mammal, it would boil itself, really one of these really big dinosaurs, it would boil itself alive from the inside out. It would be like boiling the bag dinosaur. But it had all these air-cooled air sacs. In one of these big dinosaurs like Brachiosaurus, the liver, which generates most of the heat, was the size of a car. But it was surrounded by these air sacs that took the heat directly away from it, and the dinosaur could breathe it out. So this air cooling system allowed dinosaurs to get so big. And it explains, we were talking about how things get big. Well, dinosaurs got really big, and, they managed to do it while being warm-blooded and not boiling themselves alive, because they had this amazing air cooling system that also allowed the skeleton to be very light. And which, of course, in the smaller ones allowed them much easy access to the world of flight.
There's something that struck me regarding dinosaurs, and which was the popularity of the T-Rex. I had never thought of before. Is just so interesting that that the T-Rex was the T-Rex was just something that was right toward the end. It had
one of the very last ones.
Yeah, and isn't that fascinating that that's the one that everyone's obsessed about? Is that because there's just what's going on there? Is there easier records of it? Is there more bones available? How did that become the one that everyone got so absolutely obsessed with?
Well, that's an extremely good question, and there's kind of some historical answers. I think a lot of it was to do with the opening of the West, because the T-Rex was found in Montana, Wyoming, southern Alberta, out in the Wild West. And so I think got associated in the public mind with the opening of the West and big wide open spaces and a kind of sense of adventure and danger. But quite apart from that, I think the T-Rex would have been a focus of interest wherever it was found, because it is so huge, because the teeth were so vast, because it was the ultimate killing machine. It was just supported by 2 columns of enormous legs and had a long tail, and the front of it, in front of the hind legs, was just muscle and teeth. And there's something, I suppose, romantic about the ultimate predator, especially when it's extinct and it can't get you, like the monsters under the bed, or something in a horror story. You get a frisson from the sheer horror of it. And I suppose that was part of the magic of Jurassic Park, the movie, because it allowed you, like no movie had done before, to imagine what would it have been like if it were real, and if it were really chasing you. That was, I remember going to see Jurassic Park for the first time.
Oh yeah, me too.
And amazing. It was terrifying.
Yeah.
The T-Rex, I was sitting in the very front row, of a huge movie theatre in London at a press screening with my wife. And because I was going to write a review of the movie, and the T-Rex roared over us, rawr, and we all went, ah! Yeah. It really was quite thrilling. So I think it's the ultimate, terror, horror, death machine is the T-Rex. And I think it's why it exerts such a fascination even today.
I mean, it must have. Think about early European settlers that came and first started exploring North America and just first started discovering some of these bones. It would have had to have been, you would have had to. It would have had to give some people some pause. I believe Thomas Jefferson was like he when he first came across some skeletons of a giant ground sloth was just like, hey, well, let's watch out for whatever the heck this thing is.
Well, exactly. Now, Thomas Jefferson commissioned Lewis and Clark to explore the Louisiana Purchase, and he desperately wanted them to find real live woolly mammoths, because the idea that things could be extinct didn't make sense. It didn't make sense, and so much of the world was unexplored that the view was maybe all these animals aren't extinct. Maybe they're just living somewhere else we haven't visited yet. So Lewis and Clark said, Jefferson said to Lewis and Clark, "Go forth, young men, and discover some woolly mammoths and bring them unto Philadelphia." So I can. I've seen the fossil that Jefferson described, Megalonyx. It's the claw of an extinct giant ground sloth, and it's in Philadelphia. Yeah.
Because there's all these times through history where it was just there's these ways in which the human mind has evolved to do things like. I don't know, like kind of perceive a static universe, assign agency to chaos, and make all of these assumptions that no doubt got a lot of our ancestors like the drive that they needed and the faith to overcome the insane amount of lack of predictability and control that would have otherwise stressed us to death. But I wonder how many of those in your studying of kind of early evolutionary theory, were there things that what are some of those cognitive biases that just misled some early scientists where they would have came up with the solutions so much faster? I remember looking into 𝐾𝐫𝐿𝐿 a bit. This is 1700s naturalist guy who started cataloging many of the species and had this idea of like centers of creation of this idea that like kind of stumbling on. Okay, it seems like things are morphing or something or changing over time in this way, but clearly there would have been some origin point. And so the further things are getting from this original center, the more they're degrading. And so us as Europeans are clearly the superior species, and then they're degrading over time. We had talked on our phone call about this idea of the Big Bang being hard to accept because there was this idea of like, well, the universe has always been here exactly the way that it has. And same with these extinctions with hiccups, or with these hiccups with thinking about extinction, where something that seems completely normal and intuitive to us now, after we've been after we've integrated that knowledge through cultural transmissions and evidence, there would have been so many blind spots in the evolved human perception that would have led to us not discovering evolution. Because of our evolution, we would have a harder time discovering and figuring out evolution.
I think you've just answered that one yourself, Shane. But yeah, we stumbled across. I mean, the whole idea of extinction was came up with by a French paleontologist, Georges Cuvier, who was excavating fossil creatures from the near Paris, and he said these are creatures that are not known on the Earth anymore. And that was such a huge intuitive leap to make. I mean, we cannot imagine what an intuitive leap that was. I mean, when, you'd hardly heard of fossils, when, even, animals that we now are quite familiar with from Africa and so on were novelties. To think that there might be animals that had existed but were no longer there was really quite a new thing. It was rationalized after the fact by saying, well, maybe they perished in Noah's flood. Maybe they missed the boat. And then people would say, well, God wouldn't do such a cruel thing. Noah was commanded to get all the animals 2 by 2, all of them. There hadn't, and there'd still be dinosaurs on Noah's Ark. So the very idea of extinction was not only incompatible with religion, but it was also a very, very big intuitive leap. Like you say, these days we can't, the idea that creatures can become extinct is not novel. It's easy to understand, but really back in the day, even the finest minds had a problem with comprehending the very fact of extinction, that it would have happened at all. That how dare these animals become extinct, that we can't see them and have dominion over them like Adam did. God was not thought to be quite that capricious, but anyway, it's the conceptual. You're quite right to highlight that. It's the conceptual leap is really quite huge. To imagine the fact of extinction, and that goes hand in hand with the fact of evolution as well. People think that evolution was hard to comprehend. In fact, evolution was quite easy to comprehend. A lot of people have been thinking about evolution before Darwin had.
There was farming and everything that people, like your average uneducated farmer would figure out, hey, you put this bigger bowl and mate with that.
So, but a lot of scientists were thinking about what was known as transformation back in the day. The thing that made Darwin unique was he came up with a viable mechanism by looking at, old MacDonald's farm and what farmers were doing in his own experiments, breeding pigeons and so on. But it was Cuvier who came up with the idea of extinction. That was in many ways more revolutionary because nobody had ever thought that such a thing could happen. It was really quite a conceptual leap.
Wow. There has to be so many. It's just funny to think about because there's just, I think a lot about, especially going through, entering year 3, 4 of a global pandemic, and just seeing the ways in which how our intuition has evolved made so much sense within an environment that didn't have modern technology in cities and microscopes and satellites that need to be carefully controlled to keep spinning around the earth and run our GPS and things. And so much of actual testable reality and the things that we build from our ability to build greater tools and technology from scientific testing just runs so counterintuitive to if you put a bunch of new humans on a new island and then filmed them like Truman Show or something like that, and had them sort out life, they would come up with the same. They wouldn't come up with ideas of evolution. I wouldn't think they wouldn't. So much of our modern world that is absolutely necessary for us to aspects of it that is necessary for us to navigate our modern world. It just runs so counterintuitive to all of the other drives that we've spent 200,000 years and then some building.
Well, I mean, that makes it remarkable that there are people who actually have these ideas. I mean, take Isaac Newton. Now, Isaac Newton grew up, a fairly short drive from where I am now in the east of England. And, we're talking about, it was a pandemic that reminded me of him, because he was at Cambridge University during the Great Plague of whenever it was, 1665 or something. And he had to go home to the family farm in the rural Lincolnshire when, look, the only illumination was a candle. The only heating was logs in the fireplace, not even coal. And it was, the plumbing was outside, and it was totally primitive. And he came in this environment, he invented the idea of gravity, this amazing force that could hold planetary bodies in motion and relative to each other. And the primitiveness of the world in which Newton lived came home to me when I read a biography of Newton by James Gleick. He was the guy who wrote a book called Chaos, who popularized chaos.
I love that book. It's one of the most frustrating reads. That book's the exact opposite in terms of difficulty as your book. That book I would have to throw up my hands. What's that?
I read it when I had more brain cells than I do now. But he wrote a biography of Newton, and he said one of the problems with Newton was to verify his experiments was he didn't have any accurate clocks. You need to measure how long it took something to happen. There were no clocks available to Newton that were accurate to anything less than 15 minutes. Not even seconds, 15 minutes. There were no accurate clocks. And there was no such thing as a local time. Well, there was a local time. The local time was what the vicar said it was when the clock was there. And the only accurate timepieces were the sunset and the sunrise. And that's when it was the sunset, people went to bed. And when the sunrise, people got up. And when you're trying to come up with ideas of universal gravitation in this world that is hardly more advanced than the Neolithic, frankly, you just think about how fine these minds were of Newton and Galileo and Cuvier and Darwin, who lived in the world, as you say, before there were geosynchronous satellites that could tell you the time to the microsecond. There's actually a very, very interesting question that was posed by a journalist on Nature's website, it was all to do with the future of space exploration. And the question was this: what time is it on the moon? When you think about it, that's quite a profound question, because the moon doesn't have time zones. It probably should. And what would the time zones look like, and how big would they be, and where would the meridian be, and how would we regulate it? You see, we've taken it for granted that, the whole zonation of the Earth into time zones, and the huge struggles of people like John Harrison to come up with how you measure longitude by using more and more accurate chronometers to go on ships. Because it was, when you went on board ships, it was fairly easy to learn the latitude by sighting when stars came over the horizon and, the sun and the height of the sun at midday and so on. But it was impossible to measure longitude, how far round the Earth you were. And so the only way to do it, the Navy gave huge prizes to anyone who could come up with an accurate method. And there was this fellow, John Harrison, who came up with more and more accurate clocks. And if you go to the Greenwich Royal Observatory in London, you can see Harrison's successive models. And these mechanical brass and spring clocks, they had to survive being on these wooden ships, pitching and tossing in the sea, and still not lose more than 1 second a day or something. Anyway, so you've got to hand it to these people working in these conditions, to their knowledge and their intuition.
So as we wrap up, I'm curious. The reason for reading your book seems very obvious to me, and I'm just endlessly curious about this stuff. And I think, how aren't more people just absolutely obsessed with how we got here and what this existence is. But I also, you're an editor wait, where are you? In Nature. You're an editor at Nature.
Editor at Nature,
You're an editor at Nature. I try to do this science communication thing. I try to, integrate some science into my stand-up act. And so I have maybe, we both have like a hair more utility in learning about these things. What would you say to just your average someone just working in a factory or something like that, or doing some admin work or something like that? What do they get out of reading a book like yours? What do you get out of just kind of having this an understanding of our evolutionary past?
I think it's a sense of perspective. From my book, this was the sense that I acquired while writing the book, was the immense lengths of time that things took to happen, and how tiny and fleeting the human estate is on the earth. Now, since the book's been out, there have been quite a lot of reviews on Amazon and Goodreads and so on. And there are two main reviews. One is there aren't new pictures. Well, I'm going to solve that because I'm working on a illustrated version for kids now, which should be out, I don't know when. I'm working on the text at the moment. But by kids, I mean most kids are more educated about the history of life than most adults, so it should be suitable for all ages. And the other one people say is, wow, this gave me a whole sense of perspective about the place of human beings in the universe and creation. And that's the sense that I'm glad I could convey, because that was the sense that I didn't have when I started to write the book, but I very much did when I finished. Is the terror of the length of geological time, and this could come across just by telling a story about it. And that was the message that I got from my own book, and it seems that a message that a lot of people have got from reading it. And I should, just before we close, put a plug in that the paperback should be coming out in the US and Canada in March 2023, I think.
Right around the corner.
So yeah,
probably pre-order.
So. I mean, it's been out in the UK version. The paperback's been out for a while, and
you won an award recently for the book, right?
I did. I can show you it.
Congratulations.
Your listeners won't be able to see this. It's a great glass brick. There it is.
Nice.
The Royal Society Science Book Award, which was really quite a thrill.
Yeah.
It was really quite a thrill to win that. It was a field of 219 entrants, and it was the ceremony at the Royal Society was just like the Oscars, opening an envelope and everything. So now I know what it must feel like to be nominated for Best Actor and then get the nomination. Get the award. It was I still get a little frisson thinking about it. That was last November.
Well deserved. I'm not kidding when I say it's certainly one of the best books I've read in a while, and one of just the most fantastic books I've ever read.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely terrific. I hope to have you back on again soon. We'll let me know when the paper book.
The paper, and also I'm writing another book now on human extinction.
Nice, love it.
You'll have heard it here first, Shane. This is an exclusive.
Yeah.
It's called The Decline and the Fall of the Human Empire, and I'm writing the first draft now. I don't know when that'll be out, but I'm writing it now.
Well, I'm very excited for that. So hit me up anytime that you have any new things to plug, and we'll get you back on. Absolutely. You're just such a fantastic guest and speaker and writer, and the whole package. It's such a lovely time talking with you, and getting to enjoy your humor and insights and knowledge. So thank you so much, Henry.
You're welcome, Shane. Absolutely, anytime. It's good to shoot the breeze.
Absolutely. And thank you, listeners, for being such wonderful, curious people. We'll talk with you more next week.